So there's a few guys down in England and a couple
to our audience. And even if you're hearing it recorded tomorrow, this is the 13th TFC podcast. We have about 7 of them to go. Almost every day this next week up until Christmas. Today we have Alex Natera. Alex, where exactly are you right now?
I'm in Sydney, Australia.
And is it Sunday?
It's Sunday morning.
Sunday morning.
Sunday morning. I can smell the bacon eggs cooking in the kitchen down the hallway there. So I'll no doubt, hopefully, have one, and my sons haven't eaten all of them before when I finish.
Well, this is the first time that I've ever spoken to anybody in the future.
Well, there you go. It's pretty crazy in the future, mate. There's a lot going on. You'll welcome when you get here. You'll see what I mean.
If he flew back to Chicago and he left right now, he'd actually come back. He'd actually be back in an hour. He'd gain an hour time, which is kind of
that's brilliant.
Christopher Nolan type thing. Where it really doesn't make any sense.
Is that a great way to keep young?
Yeah.
Maybe I should do that.
Just keep flying.
Just keep flying.
Fly east.
Yeah. That's it.
So, Chris, do you know anything about ISOs?
I know a little bit.
I can't wait to hear you guys talk.
So, Alex, I've been a fan of yours for some time. I secretly watch your Instagram and all that. I love your stuff. I've been using ISOs for a long time as well. So I kind of want to go down your history about how you came about. Well, first of all, explain to everyone who you're associated with, who you've been associated with, that kind of stuff. So everyone gets an idea that we didn't just grab some random guy from Australia and found a good accent to have him on the podcast.
Yeah, sure. I was originally a sportsman myself. I was a rugby player, again, from Australia, but I was playing most of my rugby in England. And after my rugby career, I then started in the S&C fitness world. So my first gig was with an English Premier League club in soccer. And then I quickly moved back to my heart, which was rugby. So I ended up working in rugby and working through the RFU, so England Rugby Systems. And then from there, that was about 3 years in Premier League soccer, 4 years in rugby. And then I moved into what we call an institute sports system. So the English Institute of Sport, leading up to, so Olympic sports essentially, leading up to 2012. Shot back home here for a little while, worked at the South Australian Sports Institute for a couple of years, and then shot over to the Middle East at Aspire Academy. A good 5 years there within their institute systems, and working full-time in track and field. Then through my institutes, I'd been in and out of track and field, servicing what I could. But the goal and the desire to be full-time in track and field, to learn with some great coaches out of Aspire, drew me over there for that 5 year period. And then since I've come back and gone back into professional sport here in Australia, working in our biggest sporting code here, which is called the Australian Football League, AFL, working with a team here out of Sydney. And actually just recently accepted a new job, again, back in the institute system. So with the New South Wales Institute of Sport, heading up their strength and conditioning department with a nice sizable staff and plenty of sports to support underneath me. So I guess in a snapshot, around 10 to 11 years in institute sports, so Olympic sports, and 10 to 11 years in professional sports. A little bit of technical coaching thrown in there from a track standpoint, but a lot more rugby union technical coaching, so being a head coach and whatnot, and also a little stint in there in the academic world lecturing.
We came across your paper. I think Mike Boyle had one of your papers up, and wasn't it about pilot, wasn't it, Tony?
About what now?
Mike Boyle made reference to one of your papers, and it was about
Yes.
a pilot. What was?
Yeah, that was reference. So that was a reference used within our article on a pilot study, essentially, where they just looked at different I guess mass on mass relative to body limbs, essentially, And that was basically, that was born of a question in the applied world. Went over to my, I think the strength coach's favorite ologist is a biomechanist, and if they happen to have a real sense of passion or interest in strength and power, you can form a really good relationship. And Dr. Phil Graham-Smith was one of those biomechanists I got to work with. So I had a bunch of questions, and I would weekly go over to him going, I've got a question, and he would then go and give me answers, measure it, and do what he could. One of them was, look, I'm single leg squatting more than anything. This particular sprinter, real power beast of a sprinter, I didn't want to bilateral squat him anymore because his numbers were huge. They're going up to approaching 3 times body weight squatting, and it just, it didn't feel right for me. It wasn't getting any faster. But I wanted to keep something in there at certain periods of time, and this was a single leg box squat in a Smith machine, and I'd either band it or go from a full box sit to make it more concentric in nature. Anyway, long story short, I didn't know what it meant though. So I didn't know what the load meant. So if I gave him 110 kilos for him to squat, what's that, 220, 30 pounds, I didn't know what that actually equated to because I wasn't going to 1 rep max test him. So basically he then came up with a system where we quantified on force plates to basically understand how much load is actually lifted on one leg versus 2 leg. It sounds pretty simple, but ultimately when you're lifting with 2 legs, the mass you're lifting is shared between both limbs and it's above the hip, and any additional load split 50-50. But when you're on just the one limb, you take all of the mass of the upper body and the free leg. So you're lifting all of that and any mass applied to the body itself. So the load's far greater. Anyway, that's how we got onto it. And we used, cadaver studies and used this flight pilot study and whatnot to reference certain things. So we're being a bit more rigorous with our scientific approach.
So in your travels, in your progression to the point where you're at now, how did you progress to isometrics? And isn't, from American standpoint, we all know that there's a traditional weightlifting model that you follow, whether it's NCAA approved or whoever your guru is. And having worked with people from Australia, New Zealand, and England, they see things completely differently than Americans do. Certainly much more open-minded, that's for sure. But what was your basic model that you started with from what you learned and what you were trained in, and then how that progressed to where you got to this point where you became an isometric guy? What were the pitfalls and what did you see that got you to that point?
Yeah, so this particular incident was actually brought about by trying to solve a problem. And I was working with a Beijing silver medalist. She just come from Beijing, won a silver medal, and ultimately she was allergic to lead, didn't want to lift. But her coach was very adamant she had to lift, and her Hungarian coach, he would motion that he wants her to be more off the ground, so more reactive. And so I'm like, look, we got to do stuff. We've got to do extra training up and above and around your current program. She's a modern pentathlete, so the run shoot discipline was important for her, and being more economical in your run meant you used less energy. Your heart rate wasn't all over the place when you steadied up to do your shooting. So a combined event, run, shoot, run, shoot, run, shoot. Anyway, I found it very difficult to put my point across to this young lady that she needed to do some sort of neuromuscular training. And I didn't have a great deal of support by the coach at the time. So it was very much me trying to convince the lady. Now, she had just won a silver medal and cruised it in Beijing. So now I'm trying to convince her that she has to do some sort of neuromuscular training when she's already a highly successful athlete. And around that time, there wasn't too many highly successful British athletes. So she was already put on a pedestal as a celebrity. And that's how they kind of celebrated their athletes that won medals in the games back then. So it was a very difficult task. But what I said to her was this, and this was just a hunch, complete hunch. I didn't have a guru to follow. I wasn't well read from the text side of things. And there was some text coming out then on isometric training, but I did read a lot of research. That was my job to, working in a really high profile institute, was to be on top of the research. So I basically said to her, if she promises to come in, I will only ever train her for 20 minutes at a time. come in 3 times a week, 20 minutes at a time, and I promise you, you won't lift the weight. And I stuck to my word. She didn't lift the weight, but she thought, you beauty, what a deal this is. Yeah, I'll do that. This guy's an idiot. How hilarious. I'll work with this guy. So she'd come in, and the movement was simply on a force plate, and measured all the time. I'd strap her in with one leg only into a sort of a mid-thigh pull position, and she would just pull as hard as she could on this isometric mid-thigh pull with one leg. And over time, I'd collect all the data as she pulled. I'd periodize it. I'd say, okay, you're going to pull at 80% effort now, 90%, 100% effort, depending on where we flowed through the weeks. And that's all she did with her program. She didn't do any other strength work at all, bar that. So I kept true to my word. She wouldn't actually lift anything. But she worked very, very hard, and her isometric peak force improved immeasurably, like by 35, 40%. So that particular exercise itself, when it's a max effort over time, so I think it was around 14 odd weeks, we had those huge gains in her isometric mid-thigh pull. Now, in my mind, I was very much a Fletcher 2008 had done a study on, and I think I put it in the in my presentation with you. But he had shown that these high-level endurance athletes improved immeasurably in a whole host of metrics, including running economy with this plantar flexion, isometric plantar flexion. So in my mind, I was like, okay, there's something in this. In my mind, I was also saying, look, she's not going to lift anyway, but actually I can get this and get the highest neuromuscular outputs I possibly can, and not get her sore, not get her annoyed. That wasn't entirely true. She did get annoyed, but that's fine. And I also, it never fit comfortably with me that the running cycle was an eccentric motion. It never fit completely with me. It was always like, well, these athletes, the best are they look stiff, they look bouncy and reactive. How can that be an eccentric motion? So it was always in my gut, a gut feel that it was much more isometric than it was eccentric. So, I took the risk, and the risk paid off. So this girl improved measurably. I'd look at some parameters of running related to running economy, but then we'd also measure running economy in not just her, but her whole cohort of athletes. So we'd get her on, oxygen measurements on the treadmills, and we'd look at her running gait across, contact time and stride lengths and stride frequencies at pace, race pace, essentially. So yeah, that was my first, I guess, exposure to it and trial of it. And then as the years went by, things would come into my mind where I'd be like, this is such a knee dominant action on this isometric mid-thigh pull. Can I change this? Or I didn't like the pull because a lot of athletes weren't used to it. They'd have to, try and get the stiffness out of their musculature and extend better. And, it was just more of a coordinated movement. So we moved to a squat, and it wasn't a bilateral squat. So we didn't have the massive high axial loading. They could get enough force out of it on an isometric squat and hold better positions without, worrying about their arms so much. And I didn't have to strap people in every time, so we could get through more and more. And then still it was, this is so knee dominant. It's not getting enough in the ankle complex and probably not enough in the hip complex as well. How can I expand this further? And then over years, and I literally mean years, over 10 years process of then putting in new exercises, then to focus more on the ankle or the hip. And then to move them onwards too, to go, okay, well, that's great. These athletes have built up, like I said, the 35% changes in max force over time. Now, how can I make this more replicate of running? The pre-tension demands, the switching of limbs and these sort of things. So then the switches and the catches came in over time as well. And that's kind of the journey of it. Now, what I've got to say is, it may come across that that's the only methodology I use, and it's definitely not. And I think we'll come into some of these questions come out, but it just forms another layer to the library of exercises that we can use. And I often now find myself looking at people moving and doing their plyometrics or doing them, and I identify that guy needs more ankle isometric work, or he needs more knee isometric work, and he or she, and that's kind of how I think now. And then I pull my little library book out, which might be a knee isometric push, and then he might start through a progression, working through over the years potentially up to sort of a knee iso switch.
Alex, if you were working with a high school athlete that is new to isometrics, do you have a starter? Do you have something that, with just talking about the average high school track athlete, what would you start a guy with?
I always start with the pushes and the holds, and for me, I almost see those average high school athletes a bit like team sport athletes, not NFL type guys, but the team sport athletes we have, where they're the first problem, if you want to call it a problem, is their ankle. So I almost always, if there was a go-to, it would always be some sort of ankle isometric holding. And the pushes really are a way of quantifying load. That's simply it. Pushes are also, so remember that's the immovable one. Pushes are also an exercise that can be used all the time in terms of, you could get, sort of straps, cargo straps, tie downs, things that you could use. So that becomes just a really flexible option, if you know what I mean, to be able to use isometric pushes often. So an ankle iso push you can do anywhere, but an ankle iso hold is the bang for buck for me, and they get a lot of purchase out of it. These young, undeveloped or team sport athletes who've just got sloppy ankles, they seem to get a lot out of those basic movements like the iso hold.
And Chris, you've preached that for a long time now, right?
Yeah.
The ankle would be the go-to for yours as well, Chris?
Yeah. It's whether it's the strength, the isometric strength you have there, or even the mobility through the ankle. And I'm not saying it has to be flexible, but your range of motion, can you get through your rocker motions and get to your forefoot is really the key to everything. In fact, I just did a video for Steve Jones where he has a kid that runs a 101 fly 10 on a speed light and a 108. And I guess because they have no football, the film guy had a lot of time, and they superimposed the runners on top of each other, stride for stride, where they started the same spot. And Steve sent the thing and said, well, why is this kid faster than this kid? They both lift the same amount of weight. And in fact, the slower kid looks better. He has better KPIs or shapes or whatever you want to call them. And so when you broke down the video, the slower kid just did not have great foot and ankle movement at all. And where the kid who ran the 101, which is almost a 10th difference in a fly 10, he had really good ankles. And so it's the same thing. And that's why I really like Alex's work, because I think he brings that out. And what also is great about what he has done is how simple it is to do those exercises. I mean, I've gotten to the point now where you just get a strap with something on the back end. There's two sides to the strap, of course. One end's got something that catches into something on the ground, and you can just pull on that strap and step up into it and do your feet perfectly. And you don't need, what does a strap cost? $5 and a stick to go through it and a stick on the other side. And so if you're out on the track and you don't have access to things, I mean, boom, right there. And then you move up to the knees. All right. It'd be more of a mid-thigh pull, unless you have a harness, which I have. And then, so you can throw those exercises out anywhere. You don't have to be in the weight room. Although he has a really cool device on one of his racks where in his video, they're pushing up into the rack, which I need to find out where he got that made, because I want one of those. But it's just an immovable object, and you're putting pressure against an immovable object, and the force that you put into it is the exact force that you're putting back into it.
Yeah, precisely. I agree. And I do use them similar to you, Chris, in terms of some trackside stimulus, call it pre-activation if you like, but some sort of stimulus right before either a plyometric or a actual run or drilling type thing. So almost multi-purpose to be able to bring them out trackside. I agree with you. And there's this, the Exergo do a really good, it's called a G strength now, where you can just put it onto the edge of your strap so you can actually quantify it. It's basically a crane scale, but they've got a lovely system now with lots of software and whatever. So we just use that as well. So and we do it before games too. We can do it straight before games as a warm up before going out in the pitch. whether guys who like it will have a maximal effort, or they even quantify rate of force development now with that gadget. So you can do a rate of force development, so an explosive effort, check your numbers, see where you're at, log that over time as well, and it goes on a lovely portal. So yeah, no, we definitely utilize that within potentiation, prep to train, or even prep to compete.
So just to kind of get this out of the way, what do you think this is replacing the traditional weight room? I know the answer to this for me, and I think a lot of people, some people give me a hard time, or Cal a hard time about it, but what has it replaced for you in the traditional weight room?
So it essentially can replace everything. That's what I was trying to get at in the presentation, that it spans quite a lot of all of that general to special type of training. I have on occasion, there's one particular sprinter I remember where I'd bring him in GPP, and he'd probably only do traditional lifting for 4 weeks, and that was it. He'd regain all of his traditional strength in that time period, and then he wouldn't do any barbell lifting as such. We might do some like squat jumping, maybe some light, it's like small volumes of Olympic lifts, but the bulk of his training was isometrics, and it was for all of knee, ankle, and hip, and we'd work through the whole spectrum. And there's times that's happened even in team sport. If they're very strong and very powerful guys, I don't feel the urge or the need to keep pushing that boat out. It only comes at a risk for me, and it's time costly and it's energy costly. So if I can get them off of that, because they've earned the right to by being either genetically gifted or training all those years to develop these qualities, then they earn the right to go completely onto isometrics. And I've never gone and go, oh no, but now they're susceptible to soft tissues. Well, no, like they're getting more force, more tension through their tissues than they could get in the traditional training. So actually, I've never had a negative effect out of the back of it. The only issues are that guys like lifting too, so that becomes a problem because they just want to lift. So and so do I. I love getting a good bench out, a good squat out too. So yeah, it's a matter of balancing the athlete's wants and needs as well with it. And what I often try and say is that doing traditional work. So if you're going to go and put 5 or 6 times body weight loads through your spine with an isometric, a knee extension or knee iso, then probably the best way to warm up for that is to work through some squats, work through some bilateral squats, do 3x3 perhaps, do some Olympics, do some, do some ballistic exercise to get warmed up to then safely put huge loads through your body and high muscle tension through your body. So it almost keeps everyone happy then. They still get to do their traditional lift. The coach with a little bit of a twitch that doesn't want to let go of traditional training for fear of the world collapsing, they still get to do their traditional training too, because it's a great warm up, and then they can move on to the isometrics off the back of that.
What do you think it can't replace? Like what can't
replace?
Like what do you
don't
need to
think
have in
it can
traditional
replace.
weight room?
I personally, I don't think it can replace the concentric explosive efforts that are related to and form part of acceleration and block starting and those sort of things, and some types of jumping that are more concentrically focused. So remember, we've got 2 pathways or a number of pathways going on when we're doing isometrics. We have this in heightened neuromuscular output. And I think I showed that with a number of those studies. We also have this change at the tissue level, morphology and architecture, but it's not for acceleration. It's not specific. We around the ankle complex, yeah, absolutely. And I do a lot of seated isometric ankle work for replicating those sort of acceleration positions. But the concentric explosive nature, where musculature is shorting hip, knee, and ankle in acceleration, can't be replicated in isometric. So you'll find if I'm focusing on acceleration with any particular athlete, they'll be doing their seated, so bent knee isometrics around the ankle area, but they'll also be doing their explosive or heavy concentric lifting as well within that.
And do you like single leg or double leg when you're doing the concentric pushes?
Very much depends if they're very, very strong already. My unilateral bilateral philosophy almost goes like this inverted U shape. Like when they're young, I get them doing lots of unilateral work because 10 years of data collection with young athlete, it's ridiculous. Like you go and do these movement screens, right? Whether you like them or not, I came into a setup once that did 10 years worth of movement screening with these athletes. And I came in and looked at all the data, over 10 years worth of data, so thousands of athletes. And I went, isn't there a commonality here? Like, do we have to keep testing this? Because everything's pointing out to discrepancies on single leg, whether it's single leg balance, whether it's single leg strength, whether it's stability on one leg. So why don't we just go, you know what? Every athlete coming through the system is going to focus on their one leg. So all of that data pretty much confirmed to me that kids need to do one leg stuff, right? They still need to learn the bilateral lifts because that's a mastery that takes powerlifters a decade to master. So they need to learn it, but the focus is on unilateral. So unilateral first, earning the right to go to bilateral, and then actually once you've achieved KPIs and whatnot bilaterally, let's focus more unilateral on the work you're doing. So I'm actually speaking at Mike Boyle's conference soon, and I'll go through that quite in depth. But that's how the schematic kind of works, you know, unilateral, bilateral, back to unilateral, and then very much case for case. So look, I know there's issues around symmetry. People say, you know, we should embrace being asymmetrical, or we should be symmetrical. If you're a physio, or what do you guys call it back there, athletic trainers. Everyone wants to be symmetrical. Coaches are pretty happy with a level of asymmetry, just finding out your own course to move effectively. But for me, particularly in the rehab setting, you know, I want them to get back to as symmetrical as they possibly can. It also still just makes sense to me if they're 20% asymmetrical to try and pull them closer to 10%. You know, it just makes sense to me. That maybe is my bias there. So when it comes to unilateral work, that becomes a mainstay as well. However, if I was looking at a system, if you want to know briefly how my system might work, I'd be doing plyos and medicine ball work. I'd then go into traditional complex, heavy strength and heavy power complex. And then all of my accessory work, all of that, including isometrics and my transfer work, so I call it link training, that normally occurs after my complex of strength and power. That link training is all unilateral. And my plyometrics move once they've progressed to unilateral. All of the assistance work is unilateral. So they're always together, but I get my big bang for buck in particular athletes off the big bilateral lifts and then move to the unilateral with the assistance lift. So they're still developing both, if you like, bilateral and unilateral. And I guess the other thing to note is, so some of my guys right now in my current cohort who have got great bilateral lifts for Aussie rules players, well, again, I don't feel the urge and the need to keep pushing. If they're already, you know, 2.2 times body weight squatter, I'm not going to keep pushing that envelope out, but I'll put them onto the one leg, you know, either step ups or the rear foot elevated squats, or and that will be chosen depending on what movement quality I'm trying to enhance with them. So if they're a vertical jump position, they need to get more leap, then they'll do a split position. So they'll be in that sort of rear foot elevated sort of position. If they're more a running based athlete, then we might just single leg squat them and keep them their foot underneath their hips, so to speak. And so there'll be a rhyme and a reason why I'll choose whatever single leg exercise they do. But yeah, they'll more focus on the single leg because I'm not prepared to keep loading them up bilaterally because it becomes my ego and that's more it than anything else.
Alex, for an American football coach, especially at the, well, I guess high school and college level, they're so focused on their players getting big, you know, on putting 20 pounds on, 30 pounds on. Can you speak to what Isometrics can do in that regard?
Yeah, Isometrics is not my go-to to get people big, for sure. It's a great tool, again, in the return to play, return to train process. when when it might be contraindicated to do sort of traditional lifting, isotonic lifting, concentric, eccentric. So then it helps in that regard. It can help to put on some change in cross-sectional area. But the biggest go-tos to cross-sectional area for me is concentric, eccentric lifting. So putting high levels of tension through your muscles with those lifts. They always seem to be more effective. And it looks like that from a research standpoint and certainly in the practical world as well. I hasten to add eccentrics. It's not something I don't talk about often, but eccentrics forms a very, very big part of my isometrics, by the way. It's just that's a whole nother topic of conversation. And a lot of the evidence there, people are hardwired, and I think it's because of some pretty poor study designs in the past that have alluded to eccentric training being really, really effective at producing, greater cross-sectional areas and increasing muscle volume. But that's not actually the case. Most of the science discredits that. Eccentrics actually isn't a great way to put on muscle mass. So it steers more to concentric lifting being the most effective way to be able to increase muscle mass. So that's, if they're the ones, if football players want to get bigger, then you'd utilize your concentric muscle training methodologies.
And eat a lot of food.
And he eat a heap ton of food and rest and do all the other stuff that bodybuilders do. Yep. Get up at 1 o'clock in the morning to have your food because get your protein hit because you haven't had it for 4 hours and all that sort of rubbish. It's all good.
So what do you do when you take your athletes out onto the track or out to sprint? What kind of work do you do with your sprinters or your fast guys?
From isometrics or just in general?
Just after you come out of an isometric, or however you work them in, what are you doing with the guys that need to move fast?
Guys that move fast. We've got some well, first of all, it's deciding what they need. So in my mind, I classify these runners, different runners, team sport athletes, even sprinters, as three. I don't like it, but 3 different animals: a warthog, a stallion, and a cheetah. And the cheetahs are generally these guys that would have come down to, I don't know, under 15 soccer, never trained in their lives, and they're the fastest guys out there. They're just genetically gifted beasts. You got these stallions who are hard workers. They've got some genetics with them, but generally they just work hard, and so they push their ceiling to get their maximal outputs and realize their genetic capabilities. And then you got these warthogs where they got nothing. They got absolutely nothing. But they can work hard, and they can work really hard. And then they're the ones on the pitch they're the decision makers. They're gifted technically, and they get around things by not being necessarily the most explosive or genetically gifted athletes. But a warthog who works to his absolute out and out capacity might be better than a stallion who's as lazy as they come and doesn't do the work. Likewise, a stallion who works to their absolute capacity. And when I say works, I'm not talking about hard work. I'm talking about doing the right things to optimize performance. If they optimize, the stallion optimizes his performance, he might be better than a lazy cheetah as well. It's just that genetically gifted guy has got the genes. They might outweigh each other. Once I work out what they are, and it's pretty simple to work out what they are within about 3 seconds. Once I work out what they are, I then prioritize what's more important for their development. So for me, a warthog, well, they don't have the physical qualities. So I can run them all I like. And I've done this so many times and made mistakes through it and drilled them and sprinted them and got them to a point where they've done some really good high quality training, and they've gotten better. Of course they're going to get better. They're doing a really specific movement that hits the neuromuscular system and the tissues in a really specific way. And they get better, but they never get as good as when I take that warthog and I develop their physical qualities in the gym, whatever those qualities might be that they're lacking. And I quantify that, measure that, and develop and put programs in place. Develop those qualities so then they can utilize it within the specific actions on the track or the field. So acceleration sessions and so on. Something like you were just alluding to before, Chris, this ankle collapse maybe in, I did this one guy, he refused to do any strength training in the off season with me. He said, no strength training, Alex. I want to see you one-on-one. it's one of my athletes. I want to see you one-on-one over the off season, really maximize your time. And I just want to do acceleration work. And his very first week, I looked at him, he ran through, and I looked at his videos and I went, mate, if we don't address this issue in your ankle, it doesn't matter how much acceleration work we do. You're going to be bottomed out and ceiling out. We're not going to get that much better, mate. We have to fix those ankles up because those ankles are completely collapsing and it's affecting the rest of the running gait completely. It's not allowing you the time to cycle. There's so many negatives that are coming off the back of it. He refused to do it, which is fine. That's they're entitled, like NFL players, in their off season to do whatever they want. So there's almost privilege for me to be able to see him, and I can at least monitor the rest of his training so he doesn't get injured. And he got a little bit better, like all that time and effort put into it, and just a little bit better. So sorry, I'm going off track here, but just to say that these three different species, warthog, stallion, and cheetah, all need different things. So cheetah, I might let run. You're going to get the best bang for buck running. We're going to put a really good program together to look after you, to keep you healthy, and we're going to maximize these sprinting sessions or acceleration sessions and just let you fly. Let the cheetahs run. The stallions might be a little bit more specific on the physical quality they have to develop, but also start letting them run more and more effectively too. But understanding that they're a very, very different beast that you might have to convince off of certain training modalities that they're fixated with. They're this mesomorph that loves the strength training, and you just got to guide them a little bit more and optimize their training through the sequencing of training and how a week looks for them. Does that answer your question? Or did I go off track there completely?
So when you guys go out and sprint, are you doing repeats? Are you doing max velocity work? What does your sprint workout look like for your stallions and your war dogs?
Yeah, it's very dependent. We will always, in an AFL environment, we'll always get our max V exposures, so our max speed exposures through flies, but at various time points. And if I talk more globally about different sports and different different working environments I've had, yeah, for sure, there'll be mainly high quality tempo work as my preference. And in fact, this one athlete actually, the athlete I was just referring to then with the sloppy ankles that needed, so the warthog, in AFL, I'm going off track here again, sorry, but in AFL, they have a very important time trial. They do time trials, 2 kilometer time trials every year. And it's the most nervous. These guys are more nervous for the 2K time trials than they are for a grand final. Like, it's crazy. There's so much emphasis put on it. This guy had only done this acceleration work, like I said, where he had capped most of his conditioning fitness work. And I said to him, look, trust me, do your tempo work. You'll go out and you'll run your PB for your 2K or be there or thereabouts for what your target has been set for. And he did trust me, and he did this tempo work, good extensive to intensive tempo work, just like track and field type work, probably actually a little bit less volume though. And his quality time trial performance was again PB, and he was fine off the back of it. So tempo work for sure. And yes, we hit max V at least one time a week, if not 2, depending on the athlete. Heavy acceleration focus as well. The only thing is with team sports, we're just very conservative with the volume. So they never hit the volumes that a track and field sprinter would hit. So for instance, an acceleration volume of say 120 to 150 meters is massive for our team sport athletes. Max V, and we'll normally do it off some sort of flies. So we dissipate the energy cost of accelerating into max V. So we'll hit them as a sort of a separate quality, and they might a bigger session at a certain certain time in the season. A big session might again be around that 150 to 200 would be a really, really big session for those sort of guys. Generally, we could quite easily operate around sort of anywhere from 40 to 60 meters acceleration and around up to 100 meters max V at various time points of smaller volume through the season. We'll do drilling. We'll work through our various types of drilling. We'll use constraints-led approaches. So we will use our wickets. We'll use a lot of dribble running. We'll use dribble running really early in return to play as well. We'll get guys doing that. You know, even with grade 2 hammies, they're doing dribble running before the week is out after hammy. Obviously with clinical signs and symptoms of, and pain to a degree diminished a little bit. various switching drills, and our plyometrics can either form part of a pre-gym or on-field sessions before the running itself.
Question from one of the attendees. You mentioned you would focus on different movement qualities for different athletes. What strategies do you use to decide what to prioritize?
Yeah, so I've got the big four, right? It's called the big four. There's acceleration, upright running, vertical jump or vertical leap, and change of direction. They're the big four movement qualities. You can branch off to many other different things from there, but they're my big four. I watch them. I speak to their coaches. Where are they deficient? What's important for their position? Is their position, if I go back to AFL, is their position a run up and punch the ball spoiler where they have to get vertical and punch the ball away from an attacker catching it? If that's important, are they being lethal at that in the environment? And then can I improve that from a physical quality standpoint, or a movement efficiency, or a decision-making pathways? So, and the same thing with this acceleration. They get the ball, are they explosive? Do they head off in the right direction and start losing people straight away? Or do they get caught quite easily? Is it a positional thing once they've caught and the position they get into to start moving? Or is it just they lack the physical quality itself in acceleration? Upright running, very simple there. We take them through, videos. We take them through different technologies we might have to have a look at what they're like and the different parameters around upright running, and then improving them. So then, obviously, if it's upright running, you can guarantee I'm going down the run-specific isometrics route. What have I left out there? Change of direction. Yeah, have they got the basic qualities of change of direction? Now eccentric comes into the framework very importantly for change of direction, and also vertical jumping, that penultimate leg, and any of the deceleration aspects where eccentrics are important. So then I start driving down that route. So I'll look at the physical quality based off of whatever the movement we're trying to enhance is, and then I look at training that movement, but breaking it down into small segments in the gym. Absolutely. Remember, after my complexes of strength and power, looking at breaking down these movements in the gym and then putting together over time in a progressed and periodized plan. And then having segments, trying to convince coaches to have segments within the training environment as well, where we can work on these drills with more chaos, the areas and where timing's an issue, where decisions need to be made. And so that all comes into this big parcel. And unfortunately, some go, you know what? You just happen to be a very talented player. You can kick straight, or you can do whatever, but you need all four. So then it's about, okay, what is the most important? Because I can work general qualities around all four, but I can't be specific in all four, every phase of the year. But you'll find some things go together well, like vertical jump and change of direction, that deceleration before going vertical, they can get grouped nicely together. Sometimes acceleration and upright running can get grouped together. Well, they do it in track and field, don't they? So they can get grouped together some way as well. So you start looking for patterns on how you can do multiple things, or how you might be able to progress things moving forward.
What is your typical length of max speed fly?
We go from 5 meters to I'm hugely conservative. So I start the preseason at 5 meters. It's literally 2 strides. That's nothing. Then we go to 5 to 10 to 15 to 20. And I'm pretty much there at 20 meters. Sometimes go up to 25, depending on the athlete, but that's my fly. That's about it. And we'll have a roll in of about 20 meters.
Yeah, that's interesting, because there are track coaches on social media that are relentless at fighting people that the 10-meter fly is total BS. And if you're not going at least 30 meters at a max sprint, you're not doing it right, and all that kind of stuff. And I find it to be a really tiring argument.
Yeah, I personally don't know why it's an argument. I know if I went straight into 20 meter with my boys, I'd probably lose my job, and that would be my last session I ever did. But B, I just wouldn't be comfortable exposing them to those max V, giving them that sort of exposure to max V off the front end of of my progression. So like I said, I'm just conservative. I'd rather have an athlete on the field and lose 2 weeks of being conservative than have them off the field because I've decided to do a 20-meter fly with an athlete that's also doing a 40-kilometer week of training. So yeah, I don't. Might it be better? Well, absolutely. Of course, we'd like more exposures, longer distances in max V for them to achieve the max V. But at the end of the day, 2 strides at max V is more than what they got beforehand. So I'm happy to do that for a week or 2 and then move it to 10, 15, and 20 and upwards. So, yeah.
What are some good coaching cues for your plantar flexion and your knee extension ISOs? Where do you see people screw these up? A better way of looking at it.
Yeah, I do see a lot of videos. I try and I'll put a videos that I like in my storyline. Like I'll go, yep, and put them into my storyline. The ones I don't, I generally just keep it quiet and just like it for them having the attempt. And but often I see far too much plantar flexion in the ISOs. People, at mid stance it's around 5 degrees plantar flexion, but people seem to really look at this short position. And if you go back to my presentation, I'll definitely talk about these longer positions having more favorable adaptations at a morphological and architectural level. So I actually work at the long positions early GPP. So I'll actually have them, heel below a box and pushing in a movable object or holding, or if they're doing ISO holds, holding in that position. Then over time, we come up to the specific angle. So heel just above box. When we're doing pushes, I try to cue them to lift their heel. So to calf raise. And that seems to be the best one to get a true isometric action around the calf ankle complex rather than knee extension into the bar, which is what the biggest problem is. That's what they tend to do. So lock your knee out or get it extended as much as possible and just calf raise as hard as you can and keep cueing that. Knee isos is not too much of a problem for me, other than really the problem being that guys and girls, people just don't know their max unless you can give them some feedback. They think they're going max. And I've done these with like elite track sprint cyclists, highly motivated guys and girls who just love putting out. That's their sport, just to put out all the time. And, I'll hide the data so they will just put out by themselves. And I've done this actually as a trial where it's just been me and the athlete and I've not said anything. I've just gone ready, 3, 2, 1, go. And looked at the data. I've done it with him and his mates in the gym and they're all yelling and there's lots of bravado and come on. And he's put out. And then I've done it with the female trampoline squad in the gym with them as well. And they've put out again. And now each stage in these really high level athletes who don't need motivation because they are just beasts, every time it got more and more. And then when I gave them feedback and they could see their traces, it would go higher again. And then we're talking meaningful changes, like 40 to 50 newtons of change each time I put a new element or I yelled or we built the environment up. So you can see even in the best of the best, if they don't have output, it's a problem because they're at 90%, even though they feel like they're at 100. So whenever you can get output. I used force plates for my whole life. I was lucky my whole life, sorry, this ISO period of my life. And so I was very lucky with that and able to, get some good data and give good feedback and train people with the force plates essentially. But not everyone has access to force plates. So I used to give people options of, a bar that's heavy that they might just shift and then you'd know that's my PB kind of thing. And you'd move, you'd then program accordingly your holds and your switches and your catches off the back of that. And then if you move that bar, you knew you'd increase strength. So put 5 kilos on. Can you move it again? Yes, you still can. Put 10 kilos on. Okay, that's your max, right? There's your max. You work out off the back of it. But now there's products, like I said, this Exergo product, G Strength. It's only a couple $100, I think. So everyone can pretty much get their hands on it now, whack it on a bar and push against it and get some really good output. And then do all of your programming off the back of that.
It's called G Strength?
G Strength from a company named Exergo. Exergo, EXSURGO. Yeah, so that's a really good product that I like out there. And I like the system. They've got like I said, they've got a dashboard now too. So all the data can just go straight up on the cloud, and they've got rate of force development, which is a very clever thing to be able to get done on essentially a crane scale. So that's some pretty cool stuff there.
What was the name of the company again?
Exsurgo, 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 and it's called the G Strength, the product.
Got it. So on your ISOs, how do you know, and you showed in the video the 4 different levels, how do you know when to progress to the next level?
Yeah, I've got some pretty stringent KPIs there. I should try and bring it up on screen. No, I won't bring it up on screen just to save time, but yeah. So let's say, for example, an isometric knee push for strong people. I've seen guys go up to 6 times body, freaky strength. Females as well. There's no difference. They just relatively can be as strong if they're at that elite end. But let's say the range is from 4.5 to say 5 times body weight on really strong people. No, that won't be a good story. Let's go for moderately strong, developing type athletes, but they're strong. They've been training for 3 or 4 years, this sort of thing. Now, if they're still pushing 3 times body weight on their isometric push, then they're not going beyond holds. So holds, the heaviest holds you'll do will be 80% of that load on an isometric push, right? That's the heaviest load. If they're still at that level, then they just need to keep getting stronger isometrically. And we don't have to be too worried that it's not specific enough, because it's a hell of a lot more specific than traditional training. And I've seen, I think I might have discussed it on the presentation, I'm not sure, but IAAF, current IAAF in Doha, the last World Championships, we end up getting this particular, working alongside with a coach, end up getting her over a 2 or 3 year process where she had been completely stagnated in her 100 and her 100 meter hurdles. Significant improvements, and the only change to the program was this implementation of run specific isometrics and some eccentrics, the eccentrics that goes along with the isometrics, to be honest. Now, she had a huge improvement, qualified, got in the finals at IAAF, and fantastic result of her. Now, she had 2 to 3 years to work on her run specific isometrics, but I think she only got up to the switches just before Doha. So she spent a hell of a long time on the pushes and the holds and got huge benefits from the pushes and the holds. So there's no reason, and she was strong. So her numbers, she was one of the ones that was up around that almost 6 times body weight knee iso push. So, but she still stayed on there. So it's specific enough because the length tension relationship is bang on, spot on, and the actual muscle action is spot on as well. So instead of necessarily having to move up, do your rate of force development push work rather than the max push work, and you can get heaps of gain in that area. So in other words, if you're still at 3 times body weight as a developing an athlete, I think you need to get to 4 and above before you start thinking about moving through into the switches. Now, that's not to say you can't do light switching, because I think developing all the skills across the continuum, except for the catches, is important. But you're not going to get your bang for buck out of switching at this standpoint because you just haven't got the qualities yet. So just build those, the push and the holds up over time, get up to above 4 times body weight, and then you can start getting into the switches with good load that's going to be challenging, that you can push the boundaries a little bit more on. And then the same thing happens all the way through the other exercises on the ankle and the hip as well, without going too much into it. But I'll tell you what, I'm very happy to attach some KPIs, just a one page of KPIs to show when you should progress through the continuum, if you like.
And the girl, you're doing this on a force plate, right? That's how you're figuring out it's 4 times. Yeah.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think use the products, use the G strength if you like to find that out as well.
I think that's one thing that people get wrong about doing isometrics and eccentrics is the amount of weight that your body can actually handle. And I think that's one of the shortcomings as a coach is you're afraid to put that kind of weight on a 140-pound girl's back or a 160-pound junior in high school. And they're like, well, I'm not too sure about this, or I'm not too sure about the force involved here. And I think that's where people kind of lose, or they get good bang for the buck initially, but then it falls off because they're afraid to really push how much it can go. There's a company in the States, it's called Osteostrong. Are you familiar with them?
Osteostrong, no.
So it's kind of, it's not great for us, but it's, I think Elon Musk is involved, and it's a way to exercise for older people. And so I've been to a couple of these gyms. If they open one here, I would join, but it's basically, I think he's got it down to 5 movements, and it's against a force plate. And it's all about how hard you can push into this plate for, 5 or 8 seconds. And it was, so there's one by my brothers. I did RPR clinics there, and I'd go out there and I'd work out there. And it's amazing how fast you improve on some of those lifts. Theirs is a basic leg press. It's a chest press. There's a flexion, a torso flexion thing. But it was incredible how fast those numbers went up. And again, to my point was, well, first of all, it's for older people because it strengthens bones. And that's one of what they're trying to do with it. And it's, we work with younger people. You don't need to worry about bones, but we really do. But again, how fast and how strong you get when you do it properly. And that's what's cool about, you say 4 times body weight. And some people are gonna think, well, that's nuts. Well, it's actually not nuts. Because when you're sprinting, it's 3 times your body weight when you hit the ground. So why can't it be that much with the bar on your back and you're just pressing into something? There's a couple questions that popped up here. Jeff Ashby wants to know, where do you get a force plate? Well, you got to start with a big credit card. But like he said, I've got this, let me put this website up in the chat, because they've got some cool stuff besides. And then have you experimented with using ISOs or other exercises to improve kicking technique in soccer, rugby, or American football?
Sorry, you just broke up on me then. Have I experimented with isometrics?
If you experiment using ISOs with other exercises to improve kicking techniques for soccer or rugby.
No, I haven't. Those researchers. So a good guy to speak to there is a guy named Danny Lum out of Singapore. He's my hero. He's modern day isometrics for performance guy. I think he's the head of S&C at Singapore Institute of Sport or something. But he's also a researcher on isometrics. And he's the best man to go to there in terms of using isometrics for a range of different sports. And again, this now doesn't become specific anymore. So run specific isometrics, as the name suggests, it's specific to running. And that's why I did it. And you know the whole story why I did it in the first place, to solve a problem with this modern pentathlete. Now, doing isometrics for other sports to enhance that performance, that's not why I do it. I don't do it, but I see it being very potent. And that's why I showed some of those researched referenced these research articles in my presentation. And it shows a range of performance changes in team sport athletes, in this soccer one, this kicking performance. I think Chris actually put it in a little snapshot on Twitter just then. Granted, they were very amateur athletes. So I'm not going to, you could do anything with them. Run upstairs with a medicine ball, for example, and they'll probably get better at a whole heap of different things. But then there's some more elite athletes that have done. One of them in there is on elite sprint cyclists, and this is a really elite sprint cyclist cohort in England, and a good N equals number as well. And you can't get any more concentric than cycling. Like that's just concentric muscle action. But they, even at the elite level, put on 3% more power output on their ergometers. Now, 3% power output for an elite cyclist is off the scale. Like, that's super improvements. And they had 2 groups there, one doing normal traditional training as such, and the other group doing isometric training, and their isometric having a significant impact in the concentric action of the cycling. So there again, there's there's a change neuromuscularly that's happening that doesn't have to be specific. What I'm suggesting with run-specific isometrics is we're getting that tissue adaptation, we're also getting neuromuscular adaptations, and then we're also being very specific about what we do. So for me, that almost ticks every box, and I think that's how I tried to come out with in the presentation around exercise classifications, how this could actually tick a lot of boxes. But if you're looking at performance enhancements in sprint canoe kayak, which is another study I highlighted there, or sprint cycling, well, then those adaptations are more from a nervous system, neuromuscular adaptation standpoint. So that's what's being developed here, and then they can utilize that in their actual performance, which is really impressive. So speak to Danny Lum there. He does heaps with non-related to necessarily running, but all other types of sports, and getting great improvement off the back of that. And he also uses the spectrum of the variables too. So you'll see some of them if you look back through the presentation, or look at some of the references I put in there, where he'll play around with, types of muscle action, length of duration of contraction, angles, and all these sort of things to try and decipher what's the most effective protocol. But as you guys know, you do a literature search, this is quite a new area still, even though I think the first isometric studies came out in 1950, and they showed some really interesting results off the back of that in normal populations. Then isometrics kind of, by the time Bob Hoffman had finished with his rack, isometrics kind of died a slow death, really, and they didn't really come back till it was used as a testing protocol with the isometric mid-thigh pull from Gregory Haff and that group, and out at, I don't know what university they are out of in America, but anyway, that's when it started coming back in, and that was about 20 years ago. And then it kind of just bubbled away along as an assessment protocol, and not a lot of people adapted. And then the physio, athletic trainers, that went into that mainstream in terms of, I think, Jill Cook and Graham Purdy started doing research on the analgesic effect of isometrics and using them in rehab or with grumbly tendons. That was about 10 years ago. So then isometrics came back in that format. And then I guess the book started coming out, around 4 or 5 years ago with isometric training, and Cal Dietz and those sort of guys started writing up on them as well. So it's gone. It's weird, but not a lot of research out there, unfortunately. But Danny Lum is the shaker and the mover in that regard. So I actually want to get him on a podcast, get him on like Pacey Performance or someone's big podcast soon. So I'm just not the one that hides, like I keep all his information, and he's got to get out there and talk to the world and share his knowledge on isometrics, because he's the guru. I'm a pretender.
You don't know where he's from? Is he? Let's see, what university he's at?
I can't recall. Let me quickly search on Twitter. I'm actually due to speak to him this week.
Singapore Sports Institute.
I'm a little bit starstruck. It feels like I'm speaking. Oh yeah, he's publishing out of there, is he? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Singapore's. Oh no, you know what? I think he's doing a lot of his PhD though with Edith Cowan in Western Australia. I just noticed that one of his publications recently was with Greg Haff and those guys out of Edith Cowan. So don't know where he gets his research ethics and stuff from, but yeah, he's got a great review out on isometrics, and I've referenced him heaps through my prezo. So have a look at his recent, I say recent, probably 1.5 years old now. Have a look at his research review, literature review on isometrics.
Do you do any isometrics for your upper body?
I've done some. In fact, one of Danny Lum's exercises is bench pull and a bench press isometric with his kayakers. I've done some over the past, but not a lot. Like this is very much. I remember when I first tried it, I actually got very ashamed. I'm a decent bench presser, and we got everyone down. These were all S&C coaches and some staff. This is about 2011 or something. Must have had 20 of them down. I thought, hey guys, I want to try an isometric bench press. We'll get everyone adjusted so they're at the right angles. Put the bench on the force plate and push into this immovable bar, and it'll register on the force plate, and we'll see who's got the best isometric force. And I was by far the best bench presser in the group. But then when we got on this bench press, and I think I ranked in the middle somewhere, and they just gave me so much jip about it. They were like, you're actually not that strong. You just got short little arms, and you've got great technique, and you've been benching since you were 12, and that's why you're good at it. So that was a bit embarrassing, bit of an eye opener there. But so yeah, I started playing with it back then. I did do some in some sticking point stuff. But I think I was recently asked about this on a podcast. I'm not there. If I was there to get a guy's bench press bigger, then I would do more of it because I know it'll be effective. But and I don't work with a lot of upper body sports. Is the isometric action on a fend? Is it there? Is it more concentric? Is it So I don't play around with it too much. But there's certainly cause for it in some combat sports, for sure. Some wrestling type sports, absolutely. But personally, I don't. But I'd still apply the same sort of information that's out there on how to prescribe isometric training if I did. One thing to, and I've been in fault for promoting this too much in the past, is that isometrics, don't cause any fatigue and you feel fresh off the back of it and stuff. It's not actually true. It's still, especially with some really, especially with some really fast twitch type fiber athletes and explosive athletes, if you give them an all out 5-second isometric, they're toast for over a week. So just be cognizant of who you're giving it to and what you're prescribing. And my options with that would be go for the rate of force development options rather than, the all out grinding options for long periods of time. Just go for the explosive options, and that seems to keep them bubbling away quite nicely. And the other thing to remember too is the longer muscle actions. And there's some good research out there on it lately too. The longer muscle action work seems to be, is more fatiguing than the shorter or specific muscle action work. So just be aware of that as well. I'm not sure how I got onto that, but just bear that in mind. I'm glad Chris shares the opinion there that it can be highly fatiguing.
Most people don't know how to push with that kind of intensity. And that's really what we're trying to do, is to get to that point where you're going to require more muscle units to complete the task of what you're asking. And especially with high school kids, it's unknown to them what that threshold is. And until you really push them and then you start putting a number on them with a force plate or one of these things, that's when you really start to see the big gains in the change. Because again, you lift weights to change tissue. And in my opinion, I think this is one of the best ways that you can change tissue.
I agree.
And one thing about your bench press, that's one of the reasons why Cal changes his stuff up so much and stays away from the powerlifting things, is on force plates. If you have really good technique, it might show great in a bench press, but what you're actually pushing out, it's really not what you think it is. And so that's why he changes positions, changes angles, things like that. So you don't master this one technique. You can go to different angles and different positions. So we know we're strengthening the whole system rather than just, greasing the groove with the bench press, which is, bounce it off my chest and push it up and put it in the rack and high five people and jump around.
Very clever way of doing it. Absolutely. I reckon I'd have a right in my gym if I started changing it up too much, but I still do. I still play around with it quite a bit, and there's plenty of variation in there. In fact, I just, the name's going to escape me, but a seminal piece of work probably about 5 years ago really started changing in my mind a few things there. Basically, it might have been a Dutch group or maybe a Danish group, and they looked at elite powerlifters and sub-elite powerlifters and looked at the variation in the synergies. So they literally had EMG all over the body from the neck down to the feet, and they looked at these synergies, and they showed that actually once you've gone from a beginner to sort of an intermediate type lifter, the synergies start forming like a little bit more predictable pathways, if you like. So it becomes much more linear. Everyone's a lot similar. But then as you become advanced, they branch out again. So these advanced powerlifters utilize completely different synergies to how they were actually performing the task. And so that actually stands in my mind quite a lot, knowing that there's somewhere along the pathway where if you're getting to a level where you're now developing your own neuromuscular strategies to become a master at your technique, you've gone too far for an athlete. Like it's beyond the realms of transferable strength, because now it's so specific to that particular task. And it's something, it's an article that blew my mind away when I read it once and just went, that's why I've been flogging to death max strength with this particular guys, and they're not going to get any better. Okay. I mean, they're going to getting better at the bench press, but not getting better at throwing people off of them, you know?
This question is actually for both of you. If a high school track coach says, man, I love that Alex Natera presentation and all that, and I've seen Chris Korfist ankle series and all that, what are the pitfalls? What are the mistakes they're going to make? What are they going to do that you want to warn them against?
That's such a great question to be able to put out there for people listening, I think. Look, I don't just view isometrics as this, but I view any modality of training that's different beyond traditional as, you know, anything that's novel, for instance, as being potent, the most potent the first time you do it. And I also view these, I guess, more specific ways of training, or I don't know, call it sexy, call it what you want, different. I view that as more the icing on the cake later on. So I still think kids need to go through their pathway of developing as is, and I don't feel there's any rush. I hear some crazy things that happen in different countries, not so much in Australia, thankfully, but I hear coaches under pressure at, you know, primary school and high school level and pushing kids to the extreme to get performance outcomes. But I think the slow burning approach is absolutely perfect. I think earning your stripes, moving better, slowly getting stronger just at your body weight, and then getting stronger and jumping more and jumping and landing effectively, and then getting stronger and learning your skills and your technique with the barbell. I think they're all the primary things to get done. I don't think there's any harm in starting to learn higher intensity skills, but not putting such a massive emphasis on it. So if it's isometric training, why not learn? Why not develop some of those tissues that are going to actually protect them? Like Chris was just saying, that it's probably one of the best ways to develop tissues. And if you have a highly developed tissue, you've probably got more resistance to strain and injury. So why not do some of that work, but more from a tissue focus rather than a big neuromuscular output focus? So yeah, even though you don't know your capacity in terms of your isometric push to then quantify your loads and your holds, that's fine. Why don't you start with a long time under tension hold of 30 seconds? This is long for me, you know that, from my article, from my prezo. But you might start with a 30-second hold, and then you might add 5 kilos while you're holding that, and then 10 kilos, and then 20 kilos, and then you might drop it down to 20 seconds and add 40 kilos. And it's going to be sub-maximal, and that's absolutely fine, but you're still going to be developing the tissue. And some of those research articles or I guess examples on the variables of training that I put out in the presentation show that some of these long time under tensions are great for tendon morphology, and working through more of a lengthened range are great also for the tissue development side of things. So there's no reason why you can't be implementing them to protect them, but then to use it as a real performance changer, well, save it. I reckon save it, because it's going to be so much more potent a little bit later on. And like Chris was saying, with that new training modality that Elon Musk has brought out, like when it's introduced, the gains are phenomenal in terms of just straight out isometric peak force changes, 30-20% changes, within a couple of weeks. So that can be quite potent as well, So yeah, that's my thought process on it. I don't think you have to go all out there. I wouldn't go to switches and catches. Go to holds, go to light holds, longer time under tension holds, and slowly build up your weight bit by bit, learning the movements, because they're challenging on their own. An isometric bridge, for example, the hip isometrics, is challenging on its own in one leg. That's enough load potentially. You get a kid holding that position for 30 seconds, they're going to get huge amounts of strain across that posterior chain. So yeah, we don't have to get sexy with them, but there's no reason why we can't introduce them from a tissue building standpoint.
Am I supposed to go now, Tony?
Yes.
I would say to not be sloppy.
Define sloppy. What do you mean by sloppy?
When you're gonna take the weight, that you have good posture. if you're on your feet, that you're not in a horrible foot position where you're way off on the side of your foot. All the little things that would be a natural cheat pattern or a natural compensation pattern, and we don't want to strengthen that compensation pattern. I think it's a great opportunity to put someone in the perfect place that you want to be and assume the weight and then strengthen that, because ideally what happens is the stronger your body gets in a certain position, it's going to want to go to that position. And so we can train out some of the poor patterns or recruitment patterns that we see just by getting them strong in a certain position. And that's one thing I do with my split squats is I'll find that position where you're weak when you push, and then I'm going to find that relationship between your shin and your spine, and that's where you're going to hold. And I hold it with my hands. If I bought a super harness to do shoulders, so I can make sure that I'm getting good spinal work as well. But I've seen kids go in and put weight on their back, just like every other knucklehead, when they go to squat, they put too much weight and all of a sudden their spine is bent like this. Their head looks like Ichabod Crane. The weight's deforming their spine. It's just not a good combination. And we don't want to get strong in a position where our spine is weak. We want to be in a good spinal position all the time, which is why I love what Alex does, because when we press into that bar, and you reach for the bar at one point, you've got to reach with your spine. And that's something opposite of what you do in traditional weightlifting, which is the bar is compressing your spine. In this case, we're extending our spine. And when you watch Dan's presentation, he talks about that, is we should do all of our exercises while we're extending our spine. It trains our brain to recruit paraspinals better. And we know once the paraspinals work well, the rest of the body is going to work well. So that's why I really like Alex's work, is it's opposite of what the traditional meathead wants to do in the weight room, but we're getting stronger. And I think I have a good story. Unfortunately, John Fox passed away this year, but he was a good example of a kid that we did a ton of isometrics with. And one day the football coach was shooting his mouth off, and I don't know how it got to this because I normally don't get into these pissing contests with someone, but I was just going to shut this dude's mouth. And I said, all right, where's your best deadlifter? And here comes this big fat lineman, and he pulled like 365 off the ground. It's like, woo, yeah, great. And so here comes John Fox at 165 pounds, and he pulled 455.
Oh. Fantastic.
And I said, well, that's what isometric strength does. We've never squatted. We've never squatted one day. He's never pulled a weight off the floor before. He just walked in and stood up with the weight. And he had the grip strength to do it because, well, everyone's seen my deadlift machine. We hang on to the deadlift machine. So his grip is strong as shit. And what's the best way to develop your upper body? Grip strength. I mean, that's what they use. And so for me, that was the major sell, that doing the isometric stuff, you can get ungodly strong.
And you not only really, really strong, but the cost is so low, right? I mean, like, you can literally do isometric stuff in season.
To a certain extent, yeah. But I think early, like Alex was talking about in GPP phases, I'm a 30-second guy in GPP phases. That's hard. And even doing Alex's stuff in the GPP phase, I think it's a neurologically taxing exercise for adolescents, or, well, some of these guys are pretty highly trained. You can see it. And how do I know? Well, at the end of the workout, it's really quiet. Nobody's talking anymore. Nobody complains about my BB King Christmas album anymore that I'm playing all the time right now. And by the way, that's a great blues album. Everyone should listen to it. BB King's Christmas album. So yeah, and that's but the recovery is fairly quick because the muscle damage isn't what it normally would be in a traditional weightlifting exercise.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you can fry yourself within the session. Recovery is pretty quick because of the lack of muscle damage. I think initially when you start doing it, yeah, that first week, just like most exercises, it's novel. The tension's quite high in the musculature. That week, maybe two, might offer a little bit of muscle soreness, but nowhere near like traditional training or certainly eccentrics. I know I saw a question earlier on there too about these particular athletes that might fry themselves for a week. They're few and far between, in my opinion. But I think you just, like any type of training that you're going to give an individual or a squad, you're going to work out what's best for that individual. So if you know that you wouldn't just go for a 5-second all-out effort first session in, you'd build into that. Why not do a 3-second? Why not do a 2 or a 1 second? Why not do a more of a ballistic action as well? If you know those type of athletes are more sensitive and that they're going to probably fry themselves, so there's no reason to do that. Utilize those 5-second all-out efforts, 10-second all-out efforts. If you can get to 10, that's what Bob Hoffman used to do. 10 seconds. I don't know how he did that. Well, I probably do know how he did that, but anyway, that's another story.
What's funny is when they push, if you get to that 10-second mark, when you watch them push at 5 seconds, you can physically see in their face they're running out of gas already. So that 10 seconds, because most of them don't breathe when they do this, because your whole body is co-contracting together to press into that system, which again, it's very rare in any other exercise where your entire body will take that load in a co-contraction. And what do we do when we sprint, when we hit the ground? The whole body goes into a co-contraction for that moment, maybe 3/100ths of a second, but it's the only time that you're going to get that in doing these isometrics is that moment. So 10 seconds I can see would be, because they don't breathe. That was my point. You see them start to turn funny colors because they're pressing so hard. So 10 seconds would be tough.
Absolutely. And the lactate's just pooling. It's just staying in there. And absolutely big metabolic consequence as well, which might be a positive thing in certain times of the season. Might be a negative in other times. Yeah. So I hope that answers the question from Jacob, I think it was.
Yeah.
Just know your athletes. Be progressive. Be in nature, like any other type of training.
Any more questions, Tony? I don't want to keep Alex too much longer.
My mind is pretty blown right now. I think I'm gonna have to fly to Australia. And no, wait, I would age though, right? I would age if I flew there.
Yeah, when I went to New Zealand last year, I arrived 2 days later, even though the flight was only 22 hours.
And you'll never get those 2 days back.
But I did when I came back. I got home an hour before I left.
But I may never want to come back.
New Zealand's pretty nice.
No, I'm good. It's absolutely outstanding, Alex. I think that the podcast, maybe more than any podcast we've done, really, really built upon your presentation. And I'm really glad we had it.
Oh, good. Thanks. I hope that doesn't mean my presentation was bad then.
No.
I appreciate it.
I understood exactly what you were talking about in the grocery stores. Because like I said, last year I was in New Zealand with John Cronin, and he took me grocery shopping. And it's like, there's no rhyme or reason to anything here. They just got stuff laid out everywhere. Like there's no grouping of things. You're walking around like, I can't find anything here. But here in the States, there's a whole aisle of cereal, and there's a whole aisle of pasta, and there's a whole aisle of whatever.
And in Australia, you call a shopping cart a trolley?
Yeah, we do. Yep. What's a trolley in America? Like a pram or what's a trolley? Or you don't have a trolley?
Oh, it's a cart.
It's a cart. Okay.
It's a cart.
Yep. No, we definitely call things randomly and differently. That's for sure. Yeah. Well, I think we're heavily influenced by the UK.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we loved your presentation as well. It was equal to this great podcast. And make sure you enjoy breakfast today on Sunday.
Because I'm about to have a pizza for dinner right now, Chicago pizza.
Oh, enjoy it. Awesome. No, I actually haven't had my breakfast yet. So I've just noticed my wife has just come back from taking the kids out, probably swimming lesson. So hopefully I can still grab a bacon egg muffin or something.
Because Tony, remember, it's summer there right now. They're at the height of summer.
Yeah. We haven't seen 30. We haven't seen, well, you guys are all Celsius too. It's not been above freezing for the last week.
Oh, wow! But perfect for Christmas. You know,
Perfect.
we blast our air cons on and we try and put like fake snow, like you spray can snow on the windows and stuff to make it feel cozy and stuff. And even the air con's not stopping us from just sweating. And you're trying to eat a big Christmas meal, ham and turkey and all this. And like all you want to do is eat a salad because it's just so hot.
Well, Alex, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you guys.
Nice
It's been a
chatting with
pleasure.
you.
Merry
Thanks
Christmas.
a lot. Thank you guys. All the best.